Hello, my name is Emily Whitecotton, and today I want to present to you guys the paper written by Lori Burrell, John Coulis, and Philip Jones. The article is called Time Preference for Investment in the Environment. I think this is a really cool paper that I was able to review and learn more about, especially because it takes behavioral economics and it compares it with environmental economics as well as investment in order to get a better view on everything that's going on. So let's go to the next slide. And like I said, the authors, Lori, John, and Philip, they work in this paper to determine the valence versus domain and different types of investments. Specifically, they were looking at monetary, environmental, and different health domains. They wanted to know if intrinsic motivation had any effect on the discount rate in these different domains, and were curious on how that intrinsic motivation will affect rates employed by that domain. Just so you guys are aware, intrinsic motivation is when someone is motivated to do things just for the sake of doing them or for the act that they're doing, not to receive any sort of monetary gain. The other question that they wanted to ask when they were looking at this study is if individuals with a higher environmental morale or more desires to make an impact in the environment, if they're likely to put a higher discount rate on benefits for this investment. If we'll go to the next slide, I felt like it was really important to put definitions to a couple of different terms in this paper because as I was reading it, I did kind of struggle understanding a lot of the terminology. First things first, it talks a lot about valence. In an economics viewpoint, valence is the degree that an input increases the use or one or more factors in a domain. The example that I got from my research and definitions when it comes to economic dictionaries is they use the example of capital goods. Capital goods can give a positive valence by adding by increasing the factors of labor, of work, because the more that you make capital goods, there's more employment, there's more labor, there's more going on in an economy. Secondly, it's important to understand what a discount rate is. And a discount rate is the interest rate used to determine the present value of future cash flows. Basically, it helps determine if what the money you're putting in is going to be worth it and if you're going to be able to get a return out of it. A high rate equals it's worth the investment, while a low rate is less likely to be worth it. And then as well, it also mentions sign effect. That is when future negative payoffs are discounted at a lower rate than future positive payoffs. So there will be a sign effect if the discount rate is lower because those negative rates aren't going to have as high of a rate on there. We'll go to the next slide. The other question that they wanted to go through when they were looking at this topic is time preferences. Evidence shows from previous studies and papers, as they mentioned in their journal, that it is key to look across different domains, not just environmental, in order to find the most accurate discount rate comparison. In order to see those returns, you need to look at not just environmental economics. You need to look at what people are investing their money in. Their hypothesis is that discount rates for cost and benefit in one domain are relevant when predicting the rates of another. This is due to preferences in individuals and how they value their investments. Individuals are likely to have different time preferences or discount rates when they focus on monetary goods than when they focus on non-monetary goods, thus resulting in higher discount rates on the former. So people are more likely to find an investment on something when they maybe don't see the return monetarily if they have that preference for it. People find it hard to attach money value to those non-monetary goods. It's hard to find the worth of things if you're not getting any sort of return. We'll go to the next slide. And with their hypothesis, they want to know if people who have intrinsic value for the things that they're investing in, are they more likely to be impatient for action? Do they want to have that happen now, or are they willing to wait? Many behavioral economics suggest that this idea is consistent with the present bias. People are more likely to settle for a smaller reward now than wait in the future. It's actually something we talked about in the past lecture with banks and with investments and with debt. Their hypothesis, therefore, is that one with a higher intrinsic value on the domain will have a higher discount rate. The higher the discount rate, the higher the sign effect and the valence will be. To test this theory, intrinsic value will be measured by the reference of the environmental morale. So someone with a high intrinsic value will also, in this study, be considered to have a large desire to have that impact in the environment. We'll go to the next slide, and their experiment is based off of this questionnaire that they gave out. They gave out a survey going over 6 different scenarios. There was 2 monetary, 2 environmental, and 2 health scenarios. They gave that to a group of economic students who all had a basic understanding of what domain effect is, what valence is, and in these questions, they were asked to pick between 2 different scenarios, one being the result of accepting something in the future versus losing or gaining something, no, reverse that, from something that you gain now to either losing or gaining in the future, which one would be more worth it? Specifically with the environmental questions, the government was debating on whether to implement a program to start with growing 100 trees or in 10 years with a certain amount of trees. And then these discount rates were obtained by comparing the 3 different scenarios that they chose and the different outcomes that came from that. The next slide. In the results, the discount rate, just so you guys can look, discount rate that is equal to 0 means that the present values and the future values were viewed equally, so they didn't really have a preference for either one. Positive values meant that people wanted to receive the gains now, and negative meant they wanted to wait for the future. Overall, with monetary gains, if you look at that visual on the very right, they're more likely to discount gains than losses. That is very similar to in the environmental environment as well. And as you can see, the tree gains were more discounted than both monetary and health. So people wanted, and they had that higher discount rate for the environment. The comparison of the numbers confirms that these discount rates vary between different domains. You can see that the contrast between gains and losses is different for each one of those. If you go to the next slide, what they did to even further analyze this and to look more into intrinsic value, to look at time preference, they actually divided these 2 groups to those having high environmental morale and those with low. In the original one, they actually did it with low, medium, and high. But with the amount of people in the medium sector being so low, they combined that with the low environmental morale. Generally, the difference in the discount rate is higher when the environmental morale is high as well. As you compare the 2 graphs on the left and the right, you can see that difference. When intrinsic motivation is relevant, individuals have a psychological desire to act and receive gains or losses immediately. The difference in this discount rate is stronger with those who have higher mental morale, and this is across all 3 domains. This is not just environmentally. To the next slide, we're going to just go over the conclusions. The following can be concluded from everything that we learned from that questionnaire, from the hypothesis that they concluded, as well as the other surveys and research that was done concerning this topic. Individuals rely on different discount rates across both valence and different domains. So they see the effect different for each different domain or each industry that they're looking at. It's not universal for one person, and that's just with preferences on where people are putting their money. Discount rates were significantly higher for gains than losses. People were more likely to put an investment for the future if they knew there was going to be a gain than if there was going to be a loss. Intrinsic motivation is likely to increase the present bias. The greater the perception of intrinsic value, the higher the discount rate is employed. Differences in discount rates are significantly higher for individuals with high or medium environmental morale, meaning that intrinsic motivation is one dimension of time preference. This study concluded that yes, it is important to look at that intrinsic motivation. It's important to see how people see that and how much value they put into waiting or getting that return now. The more that one finds intrinsic value in expressing a green identity or having that high environmental morale, the more likely they will be impatient for action to conserve that environment. Overall, I really liked how the paper ended. It said, for those who find intrinsic motivation in action, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing now. That was kind of the overall thing that they got out of this paper, especially with the environmental economics. You can look at it at the other domains as well, but that intrinsic motivation is very relevant, especially when looking at that key factor. Something to note, if you're going to look at this more deeply, you do want to look at other factors as well, because they only looked at that small group of economic students. But with the other papers that were presented within this one, the research that they stated, it does match up with the other things that were added in there. And that's my paper. I hope you guys really enjoy it, and let me know if you have any questions.